A cool breeze rustled through the trees as the golden hues of the morning sun painted the sky. In a quiet village, nestled between rolling hills and a serene river, lived a young man named Arjun. He had always been a dreamer, but lately, his heart felt heavy. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't good enough. Every time he scrolled through his phone or listened to the chatter of the villagers, he found himself comparing his life to others. His friend Rohan had a successful business, his cousin Ravi had just bought a big house, and even the boy who used to sit in the back of his class now had a high-paying job in the city. Arjun felt stuck. His small tailoring shop barely made enough to get by, and every day, he questioned if he was doing enough with his life. The weight of self-doubt pressed on his chest, making each day feel heavier than the last. One afternoon, as he sat by the riverbank, lost in thought, he noticed a crow hopping from one rock to another. Its feathers were not as shiny as the peacock's, and its voice was nowhere near as melodious as the nightingale's, yet the crow seemed content, pecking at the ground and flapping its wings with ease. Arjun watched curiously as the bird fluttered towards a group of sparrows. The smaller birds chirped and flitted about gracefully, their delicate feathers catching the sunlight. The crow, in contrast, appeared clumsy among them. A few sparrows even scolded it, as if warning it to stay away from their group. For a moment, the crow hesitated, looking at the sparrows with an almost longing gaze, as if wishing it could be like them. Arjun could relate. He, too, had spent years looking at others, wishing he could trade places with them. He sighed and looked away, but when he turned back, something unexpected happened. The crow spread its wings and soared high into the sky. Unlike the sparrows, it didn't flutter close to the ground. It climbed higher and higher, riding the wind with confidence. Within moments, it was far above the sparrows, gliding effortlessly, as if it had never doubted itself. Arjun watched in awe. That crow might not have had the beauty of a peacock or the grace of a sparrow, but it had something special, its own strength, its own way of flying. A thought struck Arjun like a bolt of lightning. The crow wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. It wasn't competing with the sparrows or envying the peacock. It simply embraced what it was meant to be. A sudden rustling sound pulled him out of his thoughts. He turned and saw an elderly man standing nearby, watching him with a gentle smile. It was Baba, the village storyteller, a man known for his wisdom and kindness. "You seem deep in thought, Arjun," Baba said, sitting beside him on the grass. Arjun hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know, Baba. I just feel like I'm not good enough. Everyone around me is doing something great, but I feel like I'm just stuck." Baba chuckled softly and pointed at the crow, now perched on a tree branch. "Tell me, my boy, do you think that crow spends its time wishing it were a sparrow or a peacock?" Arjun shook his head. "No, but maybe it does feel left out sometimes." Baba smiled. "Perhaps, but it flies higher than most birds. It finds its own way, its own food, its own place in the world. It doesn't waste its days comparing itself to others. And that, my child, is the secret to happiness." Arjun frowned, trying to take in Baba's words. "But how do I stop comparing myself? It's so easy to look at others and feel like I'm falling behind." Baba's eyes twinkled with wisdom. "Let me tell you a story," he said, settling comfortably against the tree trunk. "A story about a crow who once thought he was the most unfortunate bird in the world." Arjun leaned in, eager to listen. Something told him that this story was about to change everything he thought he knew. But before Baba could begin, the sky darkened, and a strong wind swept through the trees. The crow let out a sharp caw and took off into the distance. Baba's voice grew serious. But before I tell you, you must understand. Sometimes, the greatest lessons in life come from those who dare to embrace their own journey, instead of wishing for another." The wind carried Baba's words away as Arjun sat frozen, anticipation bubbling inside him. What was this story about? And more importantly, what lesson was he about to learn? Arjun sat still, his heart beating a little faster than before. There was something about the way Baba spoke that made him feel like this wasn't just an ordinary story. The wind had settled now, and the only sounds around them were the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Arjun turned his eyes back to the crow, which had now disappeared into the sky, leaving only a faint echo of its caw behind. Baba cleared his throat and began. Long ago, in a forest not too far from here, there lived a crow named Kalu. He was just like any other crow, black feathers, sharp eyes, and a rough voice. But unlike other birds, Kalu was never happy with himself. Every morning, he would watch the peacocks dance in the rain, their shimmering feathers catching the light in ways his dull black ones never could. He envied the sparrows for their sweet songs, the eagles for their powerful wings, and the pigeons for their friendly nature. Why was I born a crow? He often asked himself. Why couldn't I be something better? One day, as Kalu flew over a village, he heard people gathered near a pond, admiring a beautiful swan. Look at its white feathers, they whispered. Such grace, such purity. Kalu watched from a distance, his heart heavy with longing. If only I were a swan, he thought. Then people would admire me too. So, with great determination, he flew to the pond where the swan lived. Oh, great swan, Kalu called out. You are the most beautiful bird I have ever seen. You must be the happiest creature in the world. The swan turned its long neck and smiled kindly. Thank you, Kalu, it said. But I do not think I am the happiest. I have always admired the parrots. They have bright colors, and humans love to keep them as pets. They are special in ways that I am not. Kalu was surprised. The swan, despite its beauty, still wished to be someone else. Without wasting time, he flew to find a parrot. When he finally met one, perched on a guava tree, the parrot was busy eating a ripe fruit. Kalu asked, Parrot, you are loved by humans, and your feathers are bright and beautiful. Surely, you must be the happiest bird of all. The parrot laughed softly. Oh, Kalu, you think too highly of me. I may be colorful, but humans put me in cages. They do not let me fly freely like you. If I could choose, I would be an eagle, soaring high above the world, feared and respected by all. Kalu's mind raced. Even the parrot, with all its beauty, wasn't truly happy. And so, he set off to find an eagle. When he finally reached the cliffs where the eagles lived, he saw one resting on a rock, looking down at the land below. Kalu hesitated but finally asked, "O mighty eagle, you are strong, fearless, and respected by all. You must be the happiest bird in the world." The eagle opened one eye and let out a low chuckle. "You are mistaken, little crow. I am feared, yes, but I am also hunted by humans. They see my sharp claws and wings as a prize. I live in constant danger. If I could choose, I would be a crow, free, unnoticed, and able to live without fear." Kalu was stunned. He had spent his whole life wishing to be someone else, only to find out that even those he envied had their own struggles. He thought about all the birds he had met, the swan, the parrot, the eagle, and realized that none of them were completely satisfied with who they were. For the first time, he looked at his own reflection in a puddle. He was just a crow, plain and simple. But wasn't that enough? He could fly wherever he wanted, he didn't have to worry about being hunted or trapped, and he had his own strengths that no other bird had. He could survive in places most birds couldn't, he could eat almost anything, and he was one of the smartest creatures in the sky. That day, Kalu stopped wishing to be something else. He spread his wings and took flight, embracing himself for who he was. And from that moment on he was free, not just in the sky, but in his heart. Baba paused, letting the story settle into the silence around them. Arjun, who had been listening intently, felt something stir deep inside him. "So you see, my boy," Baba continued, "we all look at others and think they have it better. But the truth is, everyone carries their own struggles. The moment you stop comparing yourself to others and start embracing your own path, you will find peace. Arjun exhaled slowly. He had spent so much time wishing he had what others did, without realizing that they might have their own troubles too. Just like Kalu, he had been blind to his own strengths. But even as the lesson sank in, another thought gnawed at the back of his mind. If understanding this was so simple, why was it so hard to actually live by it? Could he really let go of years of comparison in just one moment? Baba watched him closely, as if reading his thoughts. He smiled knowingly and said, "It's not easy, Arjun. Change doesn't happen in a day. But the first step is to realize that the race you're running is yours alone. No one else can walk your path." Arjun nodded slowly, but before he could respond, a loud caw echoed through the air. He looked up and saw the same crow from earlier, now circling above them. It swooped down, landed a few feet away, and tilted its head, as if watching them. Baba chuckled. "Ah, even the crow has returned to hear what happens next." Arjun couldn't help but smile, but deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. Arjun sat in silence, his eyes still fixed on the crow. The story had struck something deep inside him, but the questions in his mind refused to settle. If it was true that everyone had their own struggles, why did it still feel like he was the only one falling behind? Why did success seem to come so easily to others while he was left to struggle? He wanted to believe Baba's words, but doubt still clung to him like a shadow. Baba let out a soft sigh, as if he could hear Arjun's unspoken thoughts. "You are still troubled," he said gently. "Tell me, what is it that weighs so heavily on your heart?" Arjun hesitated, but then the words spilled out. "Baba, I understand what you're saying, but it's hard not to compare. I see my friends moving forward, achieving things, making something of their lives. And then there's me. I work hard, I try my best, but no matter what I do, I feel like I'm stuck in the same place. Maybe some people are just meant to stay behind while others rise." Baba chuckled softly, shaking his head. "And who told you that success is measured by how far ahead someone else is?" Arjun frowned, confused. "Isn't it obvious? If I was successful, wouldn't I have something to show for it? A better shop, more customers, more money, something." Baba picked up a small stone from the ground and tossed it into the river. Ripples spread outward, disturbing the calm surface. "Tell me, Arjun," he said, "if a river flows slower than another, does that mean it has failed to reach the ocean?" Arjun blinked, taken aback by the question. He glanced at the water, watching the ripples fade away. "No, I suppose not. But—" Baba raised a finger. "Then why do you think your journey is any different? Some rivers rush forward, carving their path quickly. Others take their time, moving gently through valleys and forests. But in the end, they all find their way." Arjun remained quiet. The words made sense, but something inside him still resisted. He thought about his childhood friend Rohan, who had started a small shop around the same time as him. At first, they had struggled together, but within a few years, Rohan's business had flourished while Arjun's remained the same. Every time he walked past Rohan's shop, bustling with customers, a bitter voice inside him whispered that he had failed. And then there was his cousin Ravi. They had grown up side by side, playing in the same streets, dreaming of a future where they both made their families proud. But now, Ravi lived in the city, earning a good salary, while Arjun still stitched clothes in his tiny shop. It wasn't that he begrudged their success. He was happy for them. But it was impossible not to wonder why his life had turned out so differently. He looked back at Baba, who was watching him with patient eyes. "But Baba," Arjun finally said, his voice laced with frustration, "some people seem to have everything come easily to them, while others struggle no matter how hard they try. How is that fair?" Baba sighed, as if he had heard this question many times before. "Fairness," he said, "is an illusion we create when we measure our lives against others. But tell me, Arjun, if you could trade places with your friend Rohan or your cousin Ravi, would you do it? Arjun hesitated. At first, the thought was tempting. A more successful shop, a better life, fewer worries. But then he thought about what he would lose. The little joys of his simple life, the freedom of working for himself, the quiet moments by the river where he could sit and think. He thought about his father, who had taught him everything he knew about tailoring before passing away. If he left this life behind, would he also be leaving behind the things that truly mattered? He exhaled slowly. I don't know, he admitted. Baba smiled knowingly. That is because you are beginning to understand. The problem is not that others have more. It is that you have not yet learned to value what you already have. Arjun looked down at his hands, rough from years of work. He had spent so long wishing for something else that he had never stopped to appreciate what was already his. But before he could say anything, a loud commotion erupted from the village road behind them. Shouts and hurried footsteps filled the air. Arjun turned to see a small group of villagers rushing toward the riverbank, panic etched across their faces. What's happening? Arjun asked, standing up. A child, Suresh's son, he fell into the river, someone shouted. Arjun's heart clenched. Suresh was one of the kindest men in the village, and his young son, barely 5 years old, was known for his endless curiosity. Without thinking, Arjun took off toward the crowd, Baba following closely behind. When they reached the edge of the river, chaos unfolded before them. The boy, his tiny arms flailing, was being carried away by the strong current. Villagers stood frozen, their faces filled with fear, but no one dared to jump in. The river was deep, and its undercurrents were unpredictable. Arjun didn't hesitate. He kicked off his sandals and plunged into the water. Cold shock gripped him, but he fought against it, pushing forward with strong strokes. He had swum in this river since he was a child. He knew its depths, its hidden rocks, its tricks. The boy's cries were growing weaker. Arjun forced himself to move faster, his arms burning as he fought the current. Just as the child's head dipped below the surface, Arjun reached him, grabbing his small body and pulling him close. The boy clung to him, coughing and gasping for air. The shore seemed farther than before, and Arjun's muscles screamed for relief. But he pushed forward, focusing on each movement, ignoring the ache in his limbs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his feet touched solid ground. Strong hands pulled them both from the water as the villagers cheered. Suresh fell to his knees, clutching his son and sobbing with relief. Thank you, Arjun, he choked out. You saved my boy's life. Arjun sat on the wet ground, catching his breath, his heart still pounding. As he looked up, his eyes met Baba's. The old man smiled, pride gleaming in his gaze. And in that moment, something clicked inside Arjun. Not all victories were measured in wealth or status. Some were measured in the lives we touched, the moments that defined us, the things we did when no one was watching. But even as realization dawned, something else lingered in his mind. A quiet, nagging voice whispering that this was only the beginning of the lesson he had yet to fully understand. The village was still buzzing with talk about Arjun's bravery. Everywhere he went, people stopped him to offer their gratitude and admiration. Some called him a hero, others clapped him on the back, and a few even brought him small gifts, fruits, sweets, and other tokens of appreciation. It felt strange to him. He had never been someone people noticed before. For years, he had felt invisible, overshadowed by those who seemed to shine brighter. But now, in the eyes of the villagers, he was someone important. Yet, even as he smiled and thanked them, a part of him felt uneasy. He had done what anyone else would have done, hadn't he? It hadn't been about proving himself or seeking praise. It had simply been the right thing to do. So why did the words of admiration feel so heavy on his shoulders? Baba watched him closely over the next few days. He said little, only nodding in quiet approval whenever Arjun passed by. But Arjun could feel his gaze, as if the old man was waiting for something. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Baba approached him by the river. "You have been restless," Baba said. "Tell me, what troubles you?" Arjun hesitated before answering. "I don't understand why I feel this way," he admitted. "For the first time in my life, people are looking at me differently. They see value in me. And yet, I don't feel any different. I thought that if I proved myself, I would finally feel like I mattered. But instead, I feel more lost than before." Baba smiled knowingly. "Ah," he said, "you are beginning to see the truth. You thought that being recognized would fill the emptiness inside you. But respect from others is like the wind. It comes and goes. If you base your worth on what others say, you will always be at their mercy." Arjun frowned. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Find your own measure of worth," Baba said simply. "If you were the only person in this village, with no one to compare yourself to, what would make you feel like your life had meaning?" Arjun had no answer. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small house. The voices of the villagers still echoed in his mind. But mixed with them was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. Had he been looking for validation in all the wrong places? Had he spent his entire life measuring himself against others when, all along, his true worth had nothing to do with them? The questions followed him into the next day and the day after that. But before he could make sense of them, something happened that shook the entire village. One evening, a wealthy businessman arrived in town. He was dressed in fine clothes, his presence commanding respect. He had heard about the village's skilled tailors and was looking for someone to design garments for his growing company. The opportunity was huge. Whoever was chosen would no longer be just a simple tailor. They would be recognized across the region. The moment Arjun heard the news, his heart pounded. This was it. This was his chance to prove himself, to show that he was just as capable as Rohan, just as worthy of success as his cousin Ravi. If he could impress the businessman, everything would change. But he wasn't the only one who thought so. Rohan, too, was preparing to compete. And so were 3 other tailors from the village, each eager to secure the opportunity. The businessman had given them all 1 week. At the end of it, he would choose the best work. Arjun threw himself into his craft. He worked late into the night, his fingers sore from stitching, his mind racing with ideas. Every detail had to be perfect, every stitch, every fold, every design choice. But even as he worked, doubt crept in. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he lost? The fear gnawed at him, making his hands unsteady. He looked at Rohan's shop, always filled with customers, and wondered if he was just fooling himself. Was he really capable of winning? The night before the final selection, Arjun sat alone in his shop, staring at the nearly finished garment before him. He had poured everything into it, his skill, his effort, his heart. And yet, he wasn't sure if it would be enough. Just then, a familiar caw broke the silence. Arjun looked up and saw the crow perched on his windowsill, watching him. Its black eyes reflected the dim light of the lamp, unblinking, as if it could see straight into his thoughts. For a long moment, Arjun simply stared at it. And then, slowly, the realization hit him. He had been here before. This feeling, this fear of not being enough, it had haunted him for years. And now, even after everything he had learned, it was still here. But this time, something was different. He wasn't looking at Rohan's work. He wasn't thinking about Ravi's success. He wasn't comparing himself to anyone else. For the first time, he was only thinking about himself. And with that, something inside him shifted. He exhaled slowly, picked up his needle, and continued stitching. As the final stitches came together under the dim glow of his lamp, Arjun felt something he hadn't expected: peace. He wasn't sure if his work would win, but for the first time, that didn't seem to matter. He had done his best, and that was enough. He set the garment aside, stretching his sore fingers. The crow was still perched by the window, watching him. With a faint smile, he whispered, "Let's see what tomorrow brings." The next morning, the entire village gathered in the square. The businessman sat in the center, his sharp eyes scanning the eager contestants. One by one, the tailors presented their work. Rohan stepped forward confidently, unveiling a beautifully embroidered garment that drew gasps from the crowd. The other tailors followed, each showcasing their finest work. Then, it was Arjun's turn. He took a deep breath and laid his creation before the businessman. His garment was different, simpler in design but crafted with precision, every stitch telling a story of dedication and skill. The businessman ran his fingers over the fabric, his expression unreadable. The crowd held its breath. Then, just as the moment of judgment neared, a commotion erupted. A young boy ran into the square, breathless, his face pale with panic. "Fire!" he shouted. "Rohan's shop is on fire!" Gasps rippled through the villagers. Rohan's face went white. Without hesitation, people rushed toward the shop, Arjun among them. Smoke billowed into the sky as flames licked the wooden walls. Rohan stood frozen in shock, watching years of hard work being swallowed by fire. Without thinking, Arjun grabbed a bucket and ran toward the well. Others followed his lead, forming a chain to throw water at the raging flames. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. Neither did the villagers. Together, they battled the fire, working tirelessly until, at last, the flames died down. Rohan collapsed to his knees, coughing, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at the remains of his shop. The damage was severe. Most of his stock was gone, his tools destroyed. His once thriving business was reduced to ashes. Arjun approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll rebuild," he said softly. "You're not alone in this." Rohan looked at him, his expression unreadable. 4 years, they had been silent competitors, always measuring themselves against one another. But in this moment, there was no rivalry, only understanding. Just then, the businessman stepped forward, his face serious. "This competition can wait," he said. "Right now, what matters is standing together as a community." But even as the villagers nodded in agreement, whispering words of support, Arjun noticed something strange. The fire had spread too fast. It wasn't normal. A cold feeling settled in his stomach as a troubling thought took root. What if this fire wasn't an accident? And if it wasn't, then who had set it? And why? As the smoke settled and the villagers helped Rohan salvage whatever little remained from the wreckage, Arjun couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. The fire had started too suddenly, spread too fast, and destroyed too much. Something didn't add up. He scanned the area, his mind racing. The businessman stood near the crowd, observing everything with an unreadable expression. The villagers whispered among themselves, some still glancing at the remains of Rohan's shop in disbelief. Then Arjun's eyes fell on a pile of burnt fabric near the entrance, charred pieces of cloth that had been doused in something. He knelt and carefully picked up a piece. The scent was faint but unmistakable. Oil. His breath caught. Someone had set this fire deliberately. He rose to his feet, his heart pounding. Who would do such a thing? And why? His gaze shifted to Rohan, still devastated, his hands running through the ashes of his ruined shop. He thought of the businessman, the competition, the sudden opportunity that had appeared just before this disaster. Could someone have tried to eliminate the competition? Just then, a voice cut through his thoughts. "What are you looking at?" Rohan asked, his voice hollow. Arjun hesitated. He wanted to tell him, but how could he? The man had just lost everything. Confronting him now with the suspicion of foul play might only deepen his pain. Instead, he turned to Baba, who had been watching from a distance. He approached the old man quietly. "Baba," he whispered, "this wasn't an accident." Baba studied his face. then nodded as if he had already known. I felt it too, he said simply. Arjun clenched his fists. Then what do we do? Baba sighed. Truth has a way of revealing itself, Arjun. But only if you are willing to see it through. Arjun took a deep breath. If someone had done this on purpose, they couldn't be allowed to get away with it. But who? His mind ran through possibilities. The businessman? Another tailor who had feared Rohan's skill? Or a horrible thought struck him. What if Rohan had done it himself? No, that couldn't be. Could it? He shook the idea away. He needed proof before making any accusations. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise and made his way to the remains of Rohan's shop. The ashes were still fresh, and the air still carried the faint scent of smoke. He crouched near the spot where he had found the oil-soaked cloth and scanned the ground. Something glinted in the early morning light. He reached for it and picked up a small metallic object. A matchbox. And not just any matchbox. It had an engraving on it, one he recognized immediately. It belonged to Rohan. His breath hitched. The pieces of the puzzle started fitting together, but he still couldn't believe it. Why would Rohan destroy his own shop? The business he had built with years of effort? Before he could process it further, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned sharply to find Rohan standing there, his face unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Rohan asked. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something Arjun had never seen before. Arjun hesitated, then held up the matchbox. "I found this," he said carefully. Rohan's expression didn't change. He let out a slow breath, then walked forward and sat down on a nearby rock. "So you know," he murmured. Arjun stared at him, shocked. You really did it?" Rohan didn't look at him. Instead, he gazed at the ashes in front of him. "I didn't mean for it to spread so much," he admitted. "I thought I could control it. Just burn a part of the shop, enough to make it look like an accident. But the fire took over too fast." Arjun's hands trembled. "Why, Rohan? Why would you do this to yourself?" Rohan let out a bitter chuckle. "Because I was tired, Arjun. Tired of pretending that I was happy. Tired of carrying the weight of expectations. People thought I had everything, but they didn't see what was happening behind the scenes. Debts were piling up. The business was failing. And then this competition came, this so-called golden opportunity. I knew I wouldn't win. My best work wasn't good enough anymore." His voice cracked. "So I thought, if I lost everything, maybe people would finally see me as something other than a failure." Arjun was speechless. All this time, he had compared himself to Rohan, believing him to be more successful, more capable. And yet, Rohan had been struggling just as much, maybe even more. After a long silence, Arjun spoke. "You should have told someone," he said softly. "You didn't have to go through this alone." Rohan let out a shaky breath. Would it have mattered? People only respect success. No one cares about struggle. Arjun thought about Baba's words, about the crow, about his own journey of self-doubt. And suddenly, he saw everything clearly. "You're wrong," he said firmly. "Struggle is what makes us human. You think people only respect success, but look around you. The entire village came together to put out the fire. Not because of your shop, but because of you. You are more than what you've lost, Rohan." Rohan finally looked at him, eyes filled with unshed tears. "Do you really believe that?" Arjun nodded. "I do." At that moment, the sun began to rise, casting a warm golden glow over the village. The ruins of the shop still stood as a reminder of what had been lost, but in the new light, they also seemed like a symbol of something else. A chance to rebuild, to start over. And for the first time, Arjun understood. He had spent years comparing himself to others, chasing validation, believing that success was measured by what he had. But real worth wasn't in achievements. It was in how he lived, how he helped, how he stood by those who needed him. As the village stirred awake, Rohan exhaled slowly. "Maybe it's time to start over," he whispered. Arjun placed a hand on his shoulder. "And this time, you won't have to do it alone." The caw of a crow echoed in the distance, as if sealing the lesson that had been learned. The village slowly came back to life as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the remnants of Rohan's shop. The smell of burnt wood still lingered in the air, but the urgency of the fire had passed. What remained now was the weight of truth. Rohan sat quietly, staring at the ashes, while Arjun stood beside him, letting the silence stretch between them. After some time, Baba approached with a small group of villagers. No one spoke at first, as if unsure of what to say. Then, unexpectedly, an elderly man stepped forward. "We will help you rebuild," he said simply. Rohan's head snapped up in surprise. "But why?" A woman with kind eyes spoke next. "Because you are one of us. We don't just stand by and watch one of our own fall." Others nodded in agreement, and soon, the village had decided, brick by brick, board by board, Rohan's shop would rise again. The businessman who had come for the tailoring competition observed everything with quiet interest. When the villagers finally dispersed to gather materials, he stepped forward. "I came here looking for the best tailor," he said, glancing at both Arjun and Rohan. "But today, I saw something more valuable than skill. I saw a community that stands together. That is rare." He paused for a moment. "Arjun, your work is excellent. But what impresses me most is your character. I want to offer you the opportunity to work with my company." Arjun's breath caught. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the validation he had spent so long chasing. Yet, as he looked at Rohan, at the villagers coming together, at Baba watching with a small knowing smile, he realized something. He had already found what he was looking for. Arjun smiled and shook his head. "I appreciate your offer," he said respectfully. "But my place is here, with my people." The businessman raised an eyebrow but nodded. "A rare choice. If you ever change your mind, my doors are open." With that, he turned and left, disappearing down the road. Rohan looked at Arjun, stunned. "Why did you turn it down?" Arjun thought for a moment before answering. "Because I don't need to prove anything anymore." For years, he had believed that success was about standing above others, about winning, about being recognized. But now, he understood that true success wasn't measured in titles or competitions. It was in the people who stood by you, in the lives you touched, in the strength to lift others when they fell. Over the next few weeks, the village came together like never before. Some gathered wood, others mixed clay for bricks, and the children ran around carrying small tools, eager to help. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air as Rohan's shop slowly took shape again. Through it all, Arjun worked beside him, no longer as a competitor, but as a friend. He still had moments of doubt, moments where old thoughts tried to creep in, but they no longer controlled him. He had learned that comparing himself to others had only stolen his joy. He was enough, just as he was. One evening, as they placed the final wooden beam, Arjun wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at Rohan. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Rohan exhaled deeply and nodded. "Yeah, it does." The two of them stood in silence, watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, a reminder that every day ended with the promise of a new one. As they turned to leave, a familiar caw echoed from above. They looked up to see the black crow perched on a branch, watching them with its sharp, knowing eyes. It flapped its wings once, as if in approval, before flying off into the horizon. Arjun smiled. Maybe, just maybe, the crow had been trying to teach him something all along.